In this video, I'm going to go over how to install the bearings on stub shaft number 1. All of these stub shafts should be labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this one will be the explanation on how to install both the bearings on the lower shaft part and the upper. So let me go ahead and we're going to go ahead and we'll put on the upper one first, and then we'll put on the lower one. The reasons for that being is we can't put on the lower one, or we can't put on the upper one after we put on the lower one. So we're going to go through that process. These are the type that have an installation sleeve. I believe the upper one has an installation sleeve, while the lower one just has a locking bolt. So we're going to go through that whole process, starting with the upper one. Some of the tools that we are going to need are going to be our white grease. We're going to need a couple of our spanner wrenches. I believe spanner wrench number 17 and number 12. We're going to need a rubber hammer just to get things on and off, and then we're just going to need our bearings to actually put on. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, the first thing I want to do is I want to take some white grease, and I'm just going to put a little onto here, about yay much, just so that everything's going to slide on there nicely. I'm going to go ahead and lube up the lower one, just that way I don't have to get my hands oily again. Next, I'm going to take my installation sleeve, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to slide it on. Notice that the threads are going out away from the shaft, and this back flat side is going up towards the shaft base. Now, this ridge right here is where this sleeve should be pushed all the way up against. Like I said, sometimes this gets a little tough. We're going to shove it all the way up against that back. Next, we're going to take our bearing, and we're going to go ahead and install it. Now, I want you to notice something. When they go to install it this way, it stops right here. This bearing has a tapered inner race, so we have to make sure we put it on the correct direction. So you notice how it goes all the way to the back at that point. All right. Next, we're going to take our lock washer and our nut. We're going to go ahead and slide the lock washer on. Notice how this little tab is lining up with that keyway. We're going to go take our nut, and we're going to put it so that the tapered side is towards the bearing. And we're going to go ahead and start rotating it till it takes the threads. Be a little bit careful here. We do not want to get it cross-threaded. And we're going to just go ahead and bring it up as far as we possibly can by hand. All right. So now we're going to take our larger spanner wrench, and we're going to grab it from back in here. We're just going to take it down tight. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look over here, and we can see that the keyway is not quite lined up with the notches in our nut. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to rotate this back a little bit. We want to be careful that we're not rotating it back a whole lot, but just a little bit. So that was too much. We're going to go ahead. Tighten it back on. All right, so now I just went ahead and stopped when that notch lines up. Now I'm going to take a punch and I'm going to bend that over. All right, so now once that's down, that nut cannot rotate back off, and we are done installing the upper bearing. So let's go ahead and we're going to move on, and we're going to install our lower bearing. All right, so bearing, this next bearing is pretty easy. This should be flat section K. It's not perfectly flat. This one actually has a little bit of a taper in it too. So something to think about, again, if there's a taper in the shaft, that bearing is now directional possibly. Or if you have a bearing that has a flat race inside of it, it may not be for that particular shaft, okay? So just make sure you have the right parts when you're putting something together. So we're going to slide it on. Notice how it's already kind of fitting up there nicely. We're then going to install our lock washer. There should be a key. It's over here on this lower side. We're put it on, press it up all the way. Again, tapered inside of the nut towards the bearing. And we're going to go ahead and slowly start putting this on. Now again, the nut is N-12 for this part, and the lock washer is a W-12. All right, so after we get that nut all the way on there by hand, I'm going ahead and I'm going to take my other spanner wrench. Again, this one is the 12 to 13, and we're going to put it on. Go ahead and get it tight. So all I did this time is, I don't know if you can see this, but I stopped, and once I felt it was tight on one of these little tabs, now I'm going to take that same punch and hammer. I'm going to go ahead and hammer down flat. All right, so once that's done, you are now done installing all the bearings on the shaft. What you're going to do is you're going to take a picture, upload it onto our canvas, labeled as Stub Shaft 1. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through how to uninstall all of these bearings. That way that, one, we do not damage our shafts in any possible way. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a chisel, so that way I can get it underneath this little tab, peel it up, then we can pull that lock washer back off, or lock nut back off. I'm just going to do my best to get underneath it. Okay, once it's out of the way, you're done. Again, we're going to take our spanner wrench, go ahead and loosen this nut. Perfect. Take it all off by hand. Re-put these back up on the board in the correct location. Okay, so it looks like we're having a little bit of trouble getting this bearing off. All right, so what we got here is our bearing splitter. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take the flat side, and it's gonna press against the back of our bearings. We're gonna take it, and I'm gonna take half of it, drop it over the bearing, as the bearing falls apart on me. Okay. And then we're gonna put our nuts on, and again, we're just gonna do a really light tight on this thing. We don't want it to be digging into that shaft at all. I've got a lot of ruined shafts from people over tightening these bearing splitters, okay? So again, nice and loose. It does not have to be tight. So next I'm going to take my T-bar and our puller, and we're going to put on this. Give a wrench for this. All right, so all I'm going to do right now is just get everything tight by hand. Make sure it's pulling on it. Again, make sure nothing's going to be binding. So now all we're going to do is put our ratchet on the end here and start spinning it around, and you can see just that easy, it pops right off, okay? We're going to go ahead and just slide it off. All right, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to knock the tab back for the upper bearing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the bolts off the back, go over to the press, and we'll go ahead and press this thing off really fast. Okay, so now I got my shaft up in the press. One thing I grabbed a bigger bearing splitter. Make sure again that it is going the correct direction, has the flat side towards the bearing, and it's on there very loose. I will get very frustrated if I have a bunch of gouges from the bearing splitter into my shafts. I've already had to replace a lot of them, so be extra careful. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to start pressing down on this. Because this is a tapered bearing, it should potentially push right off. As you're pressing the bearing down, make sure that you put your hand underneath to catch it if it decides to fall. All right, so that completes this lab. Make sure that you reinstall the stub shaft number 1 before you move on to the next activity.